Let's f***ing roll.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're in the McBastards studio in FOCO, USA. I'm Brad Banyas. You're listening to the SaltyMF Go podcast. Today, we're really excited to talk to someone that's, really knows history. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the Roman Empire and Caesar and Alexander the Great and some other things. But this gentleman is an author. He has his own podcast that he hosts called The Greats of History. So we would like to welcome Phillip Barlag.
Thank you so much for having me, Brad.
Yeah,
really,
good.
It's a hell of a studio you got here.
It's different.
It is. It's great. It's a lot of fun. Puts a guy at ease.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, we wanted something that just, really was kind of off the wall, but there's meaning behind this. You know, our goats stand for independence. So you've got your independence as a goat. I've got mine, and then two souls coming together to, sit down for conversation. So there's a little bit of meaning behind that. The spirits, we got the whiskey in the back, but if you want to do that later,
Hey, you think that's coffee in my cup, but you can't really know for sure, can you?
Call out to Dunkin' Donuts.
Hey, we all need sponsors.
That's all. That's awesome. Well, you and I have known each other a while, and I recently just started listening to your podcasts about the greats of history. And you do such a great job just of kind of like storytelling and making it interesting. And sometimes, I wasn't a big history guy growing up. My older kid loves history, but, just your path in life, what brought you to want to, write books about the evil emperors
Right.
and, Julius Caesar? Like, how'd you just kind of find that passion and love for that?
Yeah, it's an important question. It's a great question. I think I've always had a bit of an interest in it. When I was in 7th grade, took social studies, and I remember getting into 10th grade, taking U.S. history and remembering everything verbatim. I was like, this curriculum is the same as what I learned 5 years ago, and I just knew. I sort of had a bit of an aptitude for history, but I think for me, the real love for Rome, it came just after I got married. My wife and I took a trip to Rome, get some bargain basement airfare. I think it was $300 each round trip. We stayed in this. We thought we were big time because we stayed in this place that had its own bathroom. But I'm not kidding, man. The bathroom was so small that you could, if you wanted to, sit on the toilet, use the sink, and use the shower and not move because it was just that. I mean, this chair has a bigger square footage than that bathroom. But I remember the first time we came into the city on the train. I remember it was like as yesterday. If you've been to Rome, it's surrounded by these giant walls, massive, massive walls, largely built in the year 270 to 275. And they were embellished and enhanced over the years. But I remember the train crossed through a cross-section of the wall that had been cut away to open up room for the tracks. And they're big when you stand underneath them. But when you see the sophistication of them, the depth of them, the size of them, it's extraordinary. This is a massive feat of engineering. It's 2,000 years old. And I remember I got out and I asked someone, like, what are those walls? And they said, oh, those walls are Aurelian. Well, who the hell's Aurelian? I had no idea who he was. I'd heard of Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. I'd heard of Caesar. I've heard of Augustus, but I didn't know who that was. But other than that, I had no idea. And it just, it blew me away how much I didn't know. Yeah. And it was an invitation to learn more. And so I just kind of started trying to answer questions. So who's Aurelian? Oh, he ruled in the crisis of the 3rd century. Well, what's the crisis of the third? You ask a question, you get an answer. It brings out 2 more questions. You just kind of keep going. And I don't know. I just fell in love.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
That's awesome. Well, you've done a great job. I mean, it's funny because you talk about a little bit about what makes these people great. I mean, obviously 2,000 years old, like how we're even talking about these people today. And I think a lot of, you and I were talking about this. I'm not going to get too much into Stoicism, but there's been kind of this resurgence of Stoicism around, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Epicurus, Seneca. And I've been reading a lot on it, and just it's amazing, even how far back that was as far as what we construe as time, but just how the political system, the other things going on at that time, the leadership skills, the leadership styles. I mean, you can relate, even though it's 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, we're using the same, operating system, right? Our brains kind of work the same way. Right. Cultural values and norms kind of shift, but our core emotions they're not that dissimilar from what people felt then, thought then. I mean, there's some constants. Every generation thinks the one below them is screwing everything up. It's just like that is a constant of human history, right? Kids these days. Stay off my lawn. Which you'll be pleased to know I love yelling at teenagers in the neighborhood when they drive too fast. Pretty much everyone thinks that their politics are uniquely screwed up and that nothing's ever been this bad before.
Right.
Everyone sort of feels this long ago nostalgia for a better time that never really existed. These are constants, and you hear them today. Someone will say at least, I just gave you 3 examples. You will hear at least one of those 3 made by someone in passing today. They are a core part of what we do. We're not that different. People like praise. People hate criticism.
Right.
People, positive reinforcement is a great motivator. The fear of punishment, it doesn't really connect with people and help change their behavior over a long period of time. So yeah, we're the same in different times.
Yep.
And the weirdest thing for me about studying the people, the specific people, is they feel so close in history. Yeah. You know, years ago, I would have thought 2,000 years ago, someone felt impossibly far away. Man, I could totally imagine Caesar sitting in that chair and us just having a conversation. They just feel so much closer when you spend more time with them, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, out of all your studies, you know, I know that you know you were talking about the Persian Empire and a lot of stuff that I was listening, the Macedonians. Like who has been your favorite like leader or figure of that time that you just thought like this person is really interesting, really intelligent, or really off the bat shit crazy, insane? Like I'll give you that. So give me some of those.
Yeah, for sure. So in the podcast series, The Greats of History, it follows people chronologically throughout history who've had the epithet of the Great. Starts with the oldest recorded person in history, a guy named Sargon the Great, who was from Acadia, Mesopotamia. And I've got 24 people picked out. I've written half of them. In my time doing this, there's one person that by far exceeded my expectations at where I started it. So I'd still call him the most improved. Right. And there's one who fell the furthest from where I thought they would be. The one that was most improved, the person that blows me away, that I think is the greatest of the greats, at least of the season 1, which is all the before the Common Era rulers, is Cyrus the Great. The Babylon or the Persian king, the founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, probably the greatest conqueror of the ancient world, built an unspeakably large empire, but he did it through, sure, he had conquests like everyone did in the ancient world, but he had a core humanity that set him apart for his age. Yeah. He went into Babylon, he took over Babylon, he issued an edict proclaiming essentially the values of his rule. It's inscribed in clay, and it's on display. It's been preserved. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder, and it is considered the foundational document of human rights. Here's a guy who's 2,500 years ago, and he decrees equal pay for women. He decrees maternity leave. And he decrees religious freedom, religious tolerance. A lot of the things that we think of as sort of aspirations to which we should be aspiring to now are things that he was doing 2,500 years ago. It's just extraordinary. So Cyrus, both the combination of his military genius and his just basic goodness, especially time adjusted, you know, really, really interesting guy. My like least improved, or the most where I thought I was going to find versus what I actually found, I really don't like Alexander the Great. Yeah. And I try really hard to not issue too much of a personal judgment as I approach the series, right? I want people to draw their own conclusions. I'm going to tell you what I find as we discover this together. What really struck me is that he was getting worse as he got older. Yeah. And, you know, he died at 32, 33 years old, under very mysterious circumstances. So much ink has been spilled trying to figure out what actually killed him. He probably drank himself to death, should have stopped, kept going, and died. But he was so deeply intolerant of anyone who disagreed with him. He would talk in such lofty rhetoric, right? Aristotle was his tutor. He grew up tutored by Aristotle. Aristotle's nephew, Callisthenes, an incredible philosopher in his own right and a historian in his own right, traveled around so that Alexander so that he could have really learned conversations, keep stretching his mind. He paid great attention to all the lofty rhetoric and the ideals and all this he said a lot of the same stuff that Cyrus might have, but he didn't actually embody them. Yeah. You know, he killed Callisthenes, for example. He got drunk and killed one of his loyalist soldiers, a man that had personally saved his life in battle, because that guy had disagreed with some of the decisions that Alexander was making. Yeah. So there's a core hypocrisy to him that surprised me as I got to know him. So Cyrus, stock rising. Alex, sell.
Yeah. Have you ever read Aristotle's Metaphysics?
I read it in undergraduate. There are some times in my life where I realized the limits of my intelligence, and that was one of them.
Well, I got to be honest with you. I'll just say that I read it and I was like, I just don't. I'm sorry. I don't get it. Maybe my feeble mindedness as a McBastard. I was like, I just can't do it. I've tried to do it, but I just couldn't do it. It's painful.
But you sound so damn smart even asking the question. Well, tell me, have you ever read Aristotle's Metaphysics?
It's kind of like formal logic. If this is then and that is that, hey, look, I don't know, man. I'm going to drink my Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
But Aristotle, interesting, among other things, is sort of the father of taxonomy and he's sort of the first biologist, first person to try to systematize the natural world. And he lived and he tried to describe every animal that he could, among which was an elephant.
Darwin, yeah.
Right, he tries to describe an elephant. Well, how does he have an elephant? He's from Greece. There's some belief that Alexander, in one of the good things in his ledger, would take all these exotic animals that he encountered and ship them back to to Aristotle to stimulate the mind thinking and discovery of his great mentor. So you imagine getting a knock on the door and it's UPS and they've got an elephant for you. That's the kind of stuff that Alexander would do that was on the cool side. So he's a super complicated, but anyway, quite a tutor to have.
That's awesome. Well, about the, I always like to, it's always good to hear about the good things everybody does, and everybody does bad things. I'm sure when you're having to conquest and conquer, and there's killing and things going on. But your evil emperors, of Rome, so Caligula, Nero, those guys, so when you were delving into that, were you just kind of wow, this is there's some really sick, dark shit going on.
There is. I mean, so Rome had 75, 80. It depends on how you keep track. There's no definitive list because there's so many people that claim to be emperor. The question is, who does history recognize as having had a valid claim? But the good ones, most people know their names, right? We know Augustus.
Yeah.
We've heard his name. Most people have heard of Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. A lot of people have heard of Trajan, Hadrian, and so forth. There's a lot of notorious ones. You mentioned Caligula. You mentioned Nero. But God, there were some really weird, twisted, perverse, strange emperors out there. And I thought it'd be fun to try to pick out the 10 worst and try to debate who was the very worst emperor. And so the book is my attempt to do that. Actually, because I am a nerd, a huge nerd, I actually hate the title of the book, Evil Roman Emperors. Because not everyone covered in there is an emperor. Right. Technically speaking, the empire was one of 3 giant periods of Roman history. There was a kingdom, there was a republic, and then there was the empire. And some of the people picked come from those other periods. I wanted to call the book Murderers, Tyrants, and Lunatics because that's kind of what they were, right? But publishers, being publishers, don't really give you all that much editorial control over your own product. But if you're listening, Roman and Littlefield, I do love you very much. But, I thought, let's kind of let's wallow in the salacious for a little bit and have a little bit of fun doing it. And it some of the stuff you just have to assume is embellished by later propagandists. Yeah. Great example, right? There's this Emperor Elagabalus. No one's heard of this guy, right? He was 14 years old when he was pulled out of a priesthood in the city of Emesa, transported across the empire and placed to be the emperor. He was a weird, confused kid, complicated kid, definitely not ready to make actual serious decisions. His mother used him as a puppet. She was really the power behind the throne, and he had all sorts of time to do whatever he wanted. He had some serious hormonal fluctuations. He was a bit of a mess, he was, and he's kind of sympathetic, except for the really weird stuff he would do. So one example, he invites everyone to his dining room. Imagine you and I sitting here, we're having dinner, we're with the emperor, we're feeling really good about ourselves. He sneaks out, and then he orders rose petals and flower petals to be dropped into the dining room. At first, all his guests think, oh, how cute. But then they just keep coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming. And they come up to their chest, and then they come up to their neck, and the people are starting to freak out. And they go to the door. The door's been barred. It's locked. They can't get out. And they just keep pouring petals in until everyone suffocates to death. And like whether that's embellished or not, it has to be based on people's impression of what that kid was capable of and how he exists in the collective memory.
Psycho.
Yeah, crazy. He made it to about 18 before someone, actually his grandmother, engineered his own murder so she could put another grandson on the throne, who, in his credit, turned out to be actually a pretty good emperor.
That's crazy.
But, so
well, that's worth reading just from that. That's so, you know,
Elagabalus. Yeah.
So if your wife has dinner guests over that you don't like, get out the rose petals and get ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, how do you even think of something like that, right? You can hear the echoes of the imagination of a kid.
Yeah,
and that's what that is. And that's anyway. So
don't invite that kid over, Johnny.
I don't think he's in the top 5. I can't quite remember exactly the ranking, but he's mostly. I don't know. There's an element of tragedy to him.
Yeah, that's crazy. So the podcast. So tell me about, like, why did you want to do that? I mean, you don't know the story of this. We just kind of said, hey, we need to have a podcast to tell stories of people like you and their passions and what they're doing, and you just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm gonna do a podcast.
Yeah, I tend to throw myself into things to try to learn for the sake of learning. And in my professional life, one of the things that I used to do is I used to work in service of really high-level corporate executives, where they were, C-suite executives of 10, 20, $30 billion companies, right? And so they go through job change from time to time. They retire, or they resign, or they get restructured out, and they have these transitions. And I always ask one of my clients, "What's your goal for your transition?" And they always say, "I want to write a book." It's like, okay, you want to write a book? Great. And then they go through their transition. They get a new job. I call them back. I was like, "How'd you do?" "Oh, I didn't get to it. I was so busy trying to figure out what I was going to do. I never got to that thing." And as it turns out, I read a stat once that said 81% of Americans want to write a book. And I thought, I want to write a book. I do. I want to do it. But I don't want to be one of the 2% that actually does it. And so I made my first attempt at writing a book back in 2012. I self-published it. It's an interesting concept. I was an amateur writer. You could take or leave the book. Most people left it. But, it felt to me like I hadn't quite satisfied the condition. I felt like I needed an editor to look across at my work, validate that it was worthy of publication, and craft a product that could be launched. And so I went through a process of writing my first book, which I wrote about the Roman Empire, which was published back in 2016, specifically about Julius Caesar. And then I enjoyed writing, so I wrote a couple more. And I think I'm done on writing books, but I'm not done with history. I'm not done sharing my love of it, of telling stories with it. As you can tell, I get pretty animated. I get pretty fired up. It's fun. Yeah. Like so many people say, "Oh, I hate history." It's because they were taught it wrong, right?
And they weren't taught all the truth around it.
Exactly. Well, yes, for sure. And a lot of history curricula is just dates and times. It's just boring as hell. So I really enjoy trying to craft a story and share a story. And so when I just didn't feel like writing another book. I feel like going through the process. And frankly, the worst part about writing books is asking people to buy it. How many times have you gotten a text from me saying, like, "Brad, I got another one. Please give me $17 more, please." I hate that side
promotion
of it.
side of it.
Yeah, I do.
We're all in promotions, man. I mean, anything we're doing, people say we're not trying to monetize this podcast at this point, but you have to promote it.
Yeah, of course.
You have to promote it, and you do have some cost associated with your time and writing that book and whatever. So
I do.
It's okay.
But I'm happy that with the podcast, I'm the one absorbing the cost, and I'm not trying to pass it on. I don't have any advertising on it yet. Although when this takes off because of
absolutely.
The great
Dunkin'
Salty
Donuts, I heard, is definitely Dunkin' Donut and Zen.
Yeah,
Zen, your good Zen, the 6 millis, great for it.
Right.
Chuck Schumi,
and
push Schumi in a little bit.
Lowe's, purveyors of fine planter barrels. We got it all. But I like. Yes, I'm still asking for people's attention. Yeah, I'm asking people, which is frankly, time is everyone's most precious commodity. I'm still asking for that, no doubt. But I'm not asking you to write me a check. I'm asking to earn your attention by virtue of the quality of the product. And it just feels a little bit more pure to me than trying to hawk another book. And so I figured it was a fun way to share my stories, share the stories that I've learned and to bring people along with me as I learn. I'll tell you, I know exactly where I was when I had the idea for the podcast. I was on a hiking trail up by Lake Lanier.
Yeah.
You can hike from Chattahoochee River Club up to the dam.
Oh, yeah.
And I walked past over the dam, was walking along behind Lake Lanier, another FOCO reference here.
That's right.
And I was listening to an audiobook, and the audiobook was called The Lost Peoples of the Ancient World, and it was about the Akkadians, this particular chapter. And I remember listening to all this stuff about Sargon, being like, how come no one knows who this guy is?
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
And then I learned he was the first person called the Great, and then the idea just clicked. And so I've been writing about the Greats, and most of what's being aired now is stuff that I wrote a year ago.
Yeah, which is good though. You have the content. You already did the research. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I will tell you as a listener, because people think, oh, well, do you listen to podcasts? I'd never listened to podcasts like ever before that. So it wasn't like, hey, yeah, we were trained to do this. But the flow of how you're telling the story and whatever, like I find myself like I can listen to it because I feel like I'm part of the story or whatever. Some of these things, like people just gloat on about, whatever the hell they're ranting about. You're just kind of like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'll give you some kudos.
No, please.
Kudos.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. No, I actually heard you say kudos, and then I pretended like I didn't just so you could praise me twice.
And by the way, Dunkin' Donuts is a excellent. Yes, take the photo shot, money shot. There it is.
There you go. No.
Well, no, I think it's amazing. I mean, I've known you for a while, and when I got back into this, and I was driving, and just all this kind of stoicism stuff that's coming up, and people kind of reaching back and looking back in time. I think they're trying to find also stories or things that are maybe different than all the horse shit going on today in the world, where nothing's positive, nothing's really about learning. It's just kind of people pushing agendas.
Right.
So history is interesting because you can take your take on it. I mean, no one knows for 100% sure kind of maybe what the whole scenario was, but
right.
The whole pedal idea is just great. It's sticking in my head now. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, man. I'd say I work really hard to make sure that there is no politics in it. In fact, the first book that's self-published is about politics, but there's not a single political statement in it.
Yeah.
The only thing that I say in that is a judgment is that Martin Luther King was a good guy. Like, he was a positive force. Yeah. That is like the only opinion that I put into that book. So in the books I've written in the podcast series, just stay the hell away from politics, or at least trying to project political opinion onto the past. And frankly,
there's enough of it.
Yeah, there's enough of it. Yeah. And it's the world's so hyper divided, right? Yeah. And we're staring down a presidential election, and the two candidates, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump. Like, if you have an opinion on one, someone is going to draw an opinion about you just based on that, right? Yeah. And people can get really riled up about these things. Everyone has their own opinions. Like, I just try and more or less, at least anything I put out there publicly, kind of try to keep mine to myself. But like, I can be like, yeah, I really like Caesar, and no one gets mad at me, right? It's just a safer place to hang out.
I love Caesar salad.
That's right. Although that Caesar
Little Caesars.
That's right. I know. We're going to see
Little
what we
Caesars, by the way.
Pizza. But yeah, it's just, in a weird way, it's sort of it's a safer place to hang out and have opinions. Yeah. Because no one really gets riled up. I mean, academics, scholars, I just finished doing some work in, trying to get a history degree. They get really frothy at the mouth, arguing with one another about certain things. I found one, as I was doing research for a paper that I had to write for a history class. I found two scholars that had each written 2 papers, academic peer-reviewed papers, hundreds of citations, and the whole point of each of those 2 was to attack the other. Yeah. So, academics can be as petulant and petty and ridiculous as anyone. But for, guys like you and me just sitting here having this conversation, if I tell you that I thought Augustus was the best or that I thought Hadrian was a little overrated, you may have an opinion on that, but you're not going to come across the chair and punch me.
I'm pretty pissed.
Don't you talk shit about Hadrian, Philip.
How dare you, Philip?
How dare you?
You want to come to dinner Friday night?
I'll bring the flowers, right?
Oh, shit. Well, so in your journey, because also I know that, like you said, you've done a lot around leadership and the executive space. you know, and when I see that tie from you studying leaders from, you know, centuries ago and what you're doing, like what are some of the takes that you have, or have you applied some of the takes that you've learned from history, you know, whether you're Alexander the Great's gone now, but,
Yep.
you know, have you seen some of those things that you saw in leadership that maybe be applied today or are still trying to be used?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think the central lesson that I've learned from studying leadership through what past leaders can teach us in the present is that the most highest form of leadership is getting someone else to want to do the thing you want them to do.
Right.
Intrinsic leadership. I'm gonna connect with you in such a way that our visions are aligned and your internal mechanism is aligned to mine. That's real power.
Yeah.
If you can have that effect on other people, that's real power. Force, exerting some sort of extrinsic influence on you to get you to act how I want you to act is not the same thing.
Yeah.
And people so often, and especially as they accumulate more authority, more physical power, they rely on that force, right? That extrinsic motivation. Yeah. You better, right? If you just think about the way things like performance reviews are structured, they're all about critique and what you can do better and all this. People are going to always be responsive to praise, and leaders are going to be the most effective if they can find a way to help create that value alignment.
Absolutely.
I'd say the other lesson that's really central to me, and if you'd like, I give you a story about it in action. It's
your podcast, bro.
No, it's your podcast. But people don't like having status thrown at them.
Right.
And that some of the best leaders through history, and I'll give you the story about Augustus, but they made their career based on diffusing the perception of their power by pretending, even sometimes when it was a bit of a farce, but to giving away their authority, or at least making a pretense of being deferential to other people, or being kind, don't throwing stuff in the face. What got Caesar killed was basically that he laid bare the fact that he was an autocrat. His successor was 5 times more autocratic, but lived much longer and was much more effective because he kept paying homage to traditional institutions. He kept doing everything he could to give away power. And so here's the example. During all the civil wars, there was this general and aristocrat who was a big partisan of Julius Caesar named Pollio. He grew fabulously wealthy, obscenely wealthy, comically wealthy, get the point. And he was kind of a gross dude. He was a gross guy. And he, when Caesar died, he shocked the world by posthumously adopting his great nephew, Gaius Octavianus. Gaius Octavius, if you've ever heard of Octavian, Octavius, they're all the same person, right? He's also the guy that becomes Augustus. He was this unknown 19-year-old kid. His mom begged him to turn down the power. He decided to take the inheritance, build his career, goes on, wins the civil wars against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and becomes the undisputed master of Rome. One of the first things he did when he became the sole ruler of Rome was he made all of his own prior actions illegal to repudiate the methods by which he'd attained power, and said, that's illegal. I'm on new footing here. And he made this grand show at this one point of giving away his power. I resign all my offices. He didn't need to hold the office to have the real power, the real authority. And his whole career was based upon giving other people the ability to also claim authority, even when he really had it himself. So if they'd removed him, then some other autocrat comes in and takes away what they've been able to accomplish underneath his rule. So his whole career, again, it's at least on the surface level, it's the respect and the deference.
Yeah.
So he goes to dinner at Pollio's house. Pollio was was a partner of his great uncle, but now Augustus is the man. Pollio has this giant fish tank, and in this fish tank has 2 lampreys. You ever seen a lamprey? It's like a giant eel, but instead of a head, it's just teeth. It is a horrifying looking creature. And he would starve these lampreys, and he would feed people that displeased him to the lampreys. And so Augustus is at dinner, and one of Pollio's slaves drops a crystal glass, to which Pollio commands that slave be thrown in and fed to the lampreys in front of Augustus. He wants to show Augustus how powerful he is. Augustus is horrified by this. As he mellowed as he got older, he turned into like a pretty decent guy. He was a horrible guy when he was growing, but he just mellowed with age. He got better, and he didn't want this to happen. So on one hand, he can command Pollio, don't do it, and Pollio will obey because he really does have the power. But if he does that, then he shatters the illusion that he's given away control.
Yeah.
So on one hand, do you give up your actual authority, and, right, the pretense, or do you let this poor guy die to maintain the charade? So what do you do in that situation? What does he do? Well, he takes his own glass and he breaks it. Oh, I guess you'll have to throw me in too. And he saves the guy's life.
Yeah.
And I know it's a really, really long-winded answer to a short question, but just people don't want to be shown up. They don't want to be bossed around. They don't want status thrown in their face. And he made his whole career about giving away his status, at least on a surface level, that he gave people a reason to buy into the facade. So just don't throw shit in people's faces, and you'll get so much immense reward for it. So.
Absolutely. And I found growing older that a lot of people that you perceive are powerful, there's people behind them that are the real power. That I had a great mentor always tell me to fly under the radar.
Yeah.
Like he was like, don't be out front, don't fly under the radar, and do what you need to do, and people will truly know who the real authority is when you walk into a room.
Yeah.
So I mean, I thought that was pretty good advice. So
absolutely. My first CEO, first job out of college, Larry Cleary, wonderful human being. I started in sales. He goes, in sales, you're going to have some victories, and you're going to have some defeats.
Right.
Give away all of the successes and own all of the failures.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm far too vain and self-centered to take that advice, but it sounded like it was good advice.
Sounded like, Larry, good job.
Yeah.
Your student here failed. He just failed. He failed. Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think some of the things that it's just so funny. I don't want to pull too much into politics, but I just think so many of the comparisons to the Roman Empire and politics absolutely corrupt anything. And any kind of power where people don't deserve power, I think, or they get some kind of power from whatever you were the king's son, right? You didn't earn it. It's not like that. It sets up to cause a lot of problems. So if someone which book would you recommend to the Salty Nation out there to start with? Like you feel like this is my best work. And then, I mean, because I'm going to encourage everyone to listen to the podcast, because even it's just, I mean, hearing people getting eaten by crazy looking eels and death by suffocation with flower petals. It's pretty entertaining. I got to be honest.
Yeah, there's some wild stuff. I mean, even that poor guy would he would have, and I know you asked me a question that I'm not answering. I'll get to it.
Sorry.
But he would hold at his dinner parties, depending on your status, you'd either have real food, or you would have food that had been painted onto wooden, pieces of wood. So if you were a high status guy, you'd get the actual pear.
Food, yeah.
But if you were a low status guy, you'd get a picture of a pear. And he'd just pretend like he just served you dinner, and you'd have to act like you were grateful for it. So seriously, the chapter on Elagabalus is actually a lot of fun. I would think that my second book is called The History of Rome and 12 Buildings. And what it does is it tries to pick 12 places in Rome that tell the chronology of Roman history from start to finish. And so if you're interested in a basic survey of I should know more about Rome, this does that. It answers the question.
Or if you're going to Rome.
Yeah. I mean, it was it was conceived as sort of a companion to the travel guide that you buy.
Yeah.
Right? What's the most famous building in Rome? You close your eyes, you think of the city, you probably see which building?
I don't know, the Vatican?
The Colosseum.
Colosseum,
right, okay.
yeah. Right,
the Vatican's a perfectly good answer. But, I think the Colosseum is the most instantly recognizable building in the world. Everyone around the world, they see the Colosseum, they know what it is. Yeah. And people know a lot about it, right? Hosted gladiator, all right, you knew it could have 50, 60,000 people.
Which is amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
Some people know that they could have flooded it and hosted naval battles, right? Why is it called the Colosseum? Right? And that's what that book does, is it answers questions like that. It tries.
So he's not going to give it away, audience.
Oh no, I'll tell you. I'll tell you.
No. You've got to read the book.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a fun story, but if you want a little bit of a hint,
No, you can tell it. I'm just teasing you.
Okay. Well, so
let it go.
Nero, right? Crazy lunatic emperor, probably overstated, right? He wasn't as bad as he's made out to be. He was this incredibly vain guy. With the Great Fire and the first Christian persecution, 64 Common Era CE, 25% of the city gets reallocated by the emperor for him to build for himself a new palace. 25%. Imagine going to Atlanta and 25% of the surface area is one house for one guy. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
This is the most powerful. It's the capital of the world. Anyway, this house is huge. It's called Domus Aurea, the Golden House. And it's unspeakably extravagant. He bankrupted the emperor. It's probably why he toppled.
Yeah.
Like why he got toppled. He poured way too much money into this vanity project, bankrupted the treasury and himself, and it caused all these revolts. Anyway, among the things that made this palace so spectacular is he had this giant lake built in the middle of his palace. And next to it, it had a statue of the Colossus of Rhodes, right? Or a remodel, if you will, like a replica of the Colossus of Rhodes. But instead of a Greek god, he put his own face on it. So now 68 comes, he gets toppled. His last words are, "What an artist the world is losing." As he tries to commit suicide, he can't quite do it. He makes his slave grab the knife and plunges it into his neck. He gets overthrown. There's a civil war. A guy arrives called Vespasian. Vespasian, his family are the ones that built the Colosseum, they were called the Flavians. The actual name of the building was called the Flavian Amphitheater. And they drained the lake, and that's the land on which it's built. And if you want to know why they could host naval battles, they're using the same plumbing.
Yeah.
Right? They're literally using the same plumbing. But instead of leaving that statue to Nero, instead of tearing it down, melting it, they just lopped it off and recast the head with Vespasian in it. So it was called the Colossus because it was based on the Colossus of Rhodes.
Yeah.
Colossus essentially means giant statue. And so because there was a giant statue next to the building, people just started calling it the Colosseum, as in the amphitheater next to the Colossus. And what's really freaking cool is if you go to Rome, and I was fortunate enough to be there about a month ago with my family, the brick pediment that had been clad in marble, but that Colossus is on, is still there, and you can still freaking see it. And it's awesome as hell if you know that that's where that statue was, and that's what statue gave that building its name, and that building sits on the land that was reclaimed from that lake. And by the way, the whole thing was paid for by the sack of Jerusalem, and so there's like this whole tie to the Holy Land, everything. I believe that it's more fun to experience the city when you know those things.
Absolutely.
And so that's what the book is. It's 12 stories just like that. So that's one. Don't worry, there's still 11 others.
Well, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, anything else? Like I want you to tell people where to find your podcast.
Sure.
I know you're doing it weekly.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So you're pretty tuned into that weekly. You're just publishing that out on like Apple Podcasts.
It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Audible, it's on YouTube. Anywhere you go, just search for The Greats of History. Greats is in quotes because it's a reference to the epithet. And enjoy it. And even if you have to lie, just tell people it's good. Like I said.
No, I think you enjoy it. I'm a pretty hard nut to crack on listening to stuff. I mean, even, we're doing this quite a bit now, and I'm like, I don't know if anyone wants to hear me pontificate on, but the reality of it is I'm a hard nut to kind of say, yeah, I'll listen to this. So I did a little bit of research and was listening. So at least I could ask you some good questions.
Yeah, and you've asked great questions. I've enjoyed the conversation. I have to tell you, I got a note from someone I grew up with. We went to different colleges. I probably haven't had a live in-person conversation with. And this guy writes to me, he's like, "Hey, I'm really enjoying your podcast. One of the things I try to do is I try to put in like obscure pop culture references that might make no sense, but if you get it, you'll get it."
Yeah.
There are a lot of History of the World Part 1 references in this podcast. Like really, they seem totally out of left field. The guy writes, he goes, "Look, I really like your podcast. I got two problems with it. One, there's no Ghostbusters reference." okay, thanks, buddy, for letting me know the one pop culture thing that you felt needed to be in there. And the second thing he goes, I don't remember your voice being so high. Like, my voice is not high. Maybe when I shriek in outrage like I just did there. It's like, what a weird thing to say. Yeah. So as long as you don't critique the pitch of my voice, which I'm going to deliberately try to talk like this for the rest of the podcast, and you don't desperately need to have a Ghostbusters reference be in there, then I think you're going to enjoy it.
Whoever you are out there, Ghostbusters, we're references. Great film. And you should drink Dunkin' Donuts
Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I know.
But we're not getting paid by Dunkin' Donuts. So, Dunkin', if you are listening, we will send you a bill.
That's right. We're not getting paid yet, but we could.
It's absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we all have to beg people to pay attention to us sometimes, and maybe we have to beg people to pay us.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of sticking with our SaltyMF Enterprise kind of to fuck it. We don't really care.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, we don't really care. But we love to have people on that. I mean, obviously, you're a talented author. I mean, you've had some of your articles, by the way, too, in Fast Company.
Yep.
MIT Sloan Management Review. So, I mean, it's not like you're not published in some other areas that people would know or read. So are you writing any other articles on leadership or anything we should look for? Or
not at the moment. I'm 3/4 of the way through the script for Herod the Great, who is a nutcase, by the way.
Awesome.
Like, fun little thing. He kills his wife. He has great regret about it. He has her body embalmed, and then he goes and spends time with her corpse and talks to her because he just regrets his rash decision.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. Poor Mariami, the first. Then he marries another woman named Mariami. You have no pressure. Yeah. Like, imagine what that's like. What happened to Mariami? Why am I the second?
Yeah,
Don't ask.
She's in there like, when are you going to get rid of this bitch in the closet? I mean, let's get rid of this gal.
I can think of other things you can use that barrel for.
That's right. We're definitely. You've given me some great ideas to take on and pass through, but. Man, I really appreciate you joining us, and
thanks for having me.
Everybody get out there. So listen to Phillip Barlag's podcast. If you're into history and just want to kind of get some great stories, I know I'll be going after the demons and the terrorists, guys. I want to listen to that. It's always a good read when you're laying there in bed with your wife and she's reading some romance novel. And what are you talking about? Oh, this guy just fed this guy to some fish. It's awesome. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks, Brad. And if I can just say, I know you're salty. You're also a little sweet.
Yeah.
But your secret's safe with me.
Yeah, I'm not a total bad guy, definitely. But, Salty was created actually to, honor people like yourself and just real people. And, the core behind us has to do with really family and friends and loyalty and trust and good things. So even though we are a little bit crusty on the surface, deep down, we definitely give you a cup of Dunkin' coffee or a lovely Zen if your nicotine is low. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all. You heard it on the SaltyMF Goat podcast. We talked to Phillip Barlag. Till next time, let's go.